From coins to Einstein, how tonight's tiniest ever little fabrication job has got me thinking about forces. I had a softball instructor come to me and ask if I could drill holes inside of these coins so that they could demonstrate centrifugal force by tying a little thread onto this and showing how it has to spin faster as the diameter of the rotation decreases and goes slower as the length of the thread increases. I just used a little 5/64 bit here and then used a 5/32 to just take the little burr off. But fun fact, did you know that centrifugal force isn't actually a real force? It's just the perception that you have when you feel like you're going to keep going in a straight line when you're being held at a central point by centripetal force. Centripetal force is a real force. Centripetal force is whatever is keeping you to that center point. When you are taking a left and your body turns to the right, you're being held in place by the side of the car. Or when you're in an amusement park and you're in one of those rotating rides and you can like push yourself up on the wall, you don't actually have a force pushing you out, but you do have a force pushing back on your back. That's centripetal force. That's the one trying to keep you toward the center of the ride. And the perception of being pushed is centrifugal force. And it's not really a real force, but it is useful when doing calculations. Centripetal force is the string as I'm spinning this little eye hook on my string. It's the tension in the string. The bigger it goes, the slower it spins. Newton is credited with inventing centripetal force, and it helped to destroy the idea of a geocentric universe. Before that, the church approved the idea that everything in the heavens and the cosmos was being held in place by like giant crystals and angels and God. And the centripetal force model helped to destroy the geocentric notion. Displaying centripetal forces was a step toward destroying that idea, that we actually have a heliocentric universe and gravity that holds all the planets going around. There's nothing magical happening. I mean, it's magical, but explainable. Centripetal force is what gives you your balance. It's the liquid inside of your inner ears that kind of sloshes around, and as you move it, your brain senses the liquid on the hairs inside of your ears and kind of writes you and makes sense of it, interprets motion in keeping you upright. Centripetal force has to be calculated in roller coasters because engineers have to make perfect curves so that your butt kind of stays in the seat the whole way around. The first original roller coasters, when they did the loop-de-de-loops, were perfect loops, and people were actually experiencing like breakneck g-forces, inertia type stuff at the bottoms of the loop, and they had this uncomfortable weightlessness in the top because they weren't teardrop shaped like they are today. They're called clothoid loops, and they're intended to even out those centripetal forces smoothly instead of all at once. Centrifuges in a medical or an educational setting work because more centripetal force is necessary for large particles to stay in a circular motion, so they are a lot faster to go to the edge, settle outward faster. Fun fact, the term centrifuge originally was a way to describe somebody dying by spinning around, and it was called your soul escaping through your head, and it was like centrifuge was death by spinning around too fast. That was how they described, that thing when they would put someone on a spinning platform and they could not handle those forces. That was, centrifuge was a type of death. And some of the very first centrifuges were dairy farmers. They put milk inside of bottles and they could spin it and they could determine the fat content of milk just by separating it out simply. The fat was more dense. The fat would be on the outside of the spin and the skim milk would be more toward the edges, toward the inside of the spin because the fat was more dense. Some World War II bombs used centripetal forces to arm themselves, and this kept them from going off. Like, as they were loading them onto the planes and like being on the planes, they were fitted with a little rotor inside of them that would spin, and then as they were dropped, the motor would build up the centripetal forces, and it wasn't until it got to a certain point that it completed the circuit and then detonated. It was kind of a timer of sorts. It was a safety mechanism. Einstein famously got to thinking about all of this in context of being on a merry-go-round and how you feel when you're on the merry-go-round. You're being pushed into the side of it, but an observer watching you can't see that force. They can't perceive the fact that you are being pushed against the wall. So is that really a force at all? And we don't call it a force. Centrifugal force isn't a real force. But he took it one step further and thought, well, is gravity also not really a real force because I can't perceive you feeling gravity? What about gravity then? Perhaps it isn't actually a force. Perhaps it's just the perception of a feeling of being pulled, except gravity isn't actually a pull. Gravity is actually space itself curving. So maybe these aren't forces at all, but maybe they're just like the effects Once again, I'm not a physicist. This is just how I understand it. Bonus nugget, GPS satellites work with Einstein's calculations. There's like 30 or more probably by now GPS satellites orbiting our Earth, and they travel fast because they're way up there. It's like the Earth's spinning, rotating, and the satellites are way out here. They're far away from Earth's gravity, and so their clocks tick differently than ours do. And they're very, very accurate. They're accurate atomic clocks, and that's how our phones work to locate us. They pick up the signals on 4 or more. They used to triangulate, but I think they use more than 4 satellites now, and they, take the signal from the satellites and the phones, and they measure the time it takes to get to each one, and it can pinpoint exactly where you are on Earth. And because the timing on the satellites is different from the time on Earth, they have to use Einstein's equations to even them up, or else we would be off by tons of miles every single day. Because they're moving so fast, time moves slower for them. Their clocks tick slowly, and so their clocks would be slow compared to ours. Time ticks faster. In weaker gravity, time ticks faster, so their clocks are faster because of that. There's a lot of stuff they have to do calculating with the satellites way out there because of how they're spinning around Earth. We are still using Einstein's calculations to do that. Washing machines in some areas that don't have the kind of resources that we might take for granted in our developed countries, they use gutted, hacked washing machines as centrifuges and as purification machines, because that's all they have available. Also, if you've ever wondered how the softener, when I was a kid, I wondered how on earth does the softener in the center of the agitator in my washing machine come out without, why do you have to put it in the center of the washing machine instead of when you put the clothes in? How does it know to come out in the rinse cycle? The softener comes out in the rinse, and it's because of centrifugal force, centripetal force. The old ones anyway. My old, when I grew up, the agitator did not have a hole in it, and so you put the softener in the center, water it down with a little water, and upon the rinse cycle, your washer does its first spin, spins all of the water out of the wash cycle, and at the same time, the softener comes up out of the cap into the clothes. The rinse water comes in, rinses it all around with a softener, and then spins out again through the holes. The barrel of the washer with the holes is the force exerted on your clothes as they're being moved outside of a central point. But some washers do not work with a centrifugal force. They work with a siphon system. You pour your sanitizer or your softener in that center area, and there's a little tube that goes down in, and when the fills up, somehow a siphon works. Somehow when it comes out through the spin cycle, it sucks it down through that siphon tube, and that's where the softener comes from. What am I talking about? These coins, potentially my smallest fabricating job ever in terms of scale and time necessary, unless you count this video. Thanks for coming to my weld talk.